Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Quigley on Divorce, a behind-the-scenes look. I'm your host, James Quigley, joined with my partner, Jordan Rosenberg. Jordan, welcome.
Thanks, James.
Today we're going to kind of have a follow-up to a sort of the relaunch podcast we did earlier, wherein we sort of did a State of the Union heading into the third quarter of 2022. What's changed in the 2.5 years since the shutdown began, and what are we dealing with at this time in our careers? The sort of the build on to that, I think, at this time of the year is to really, with the way things are, with what we're dealing with as the world of divorce and how it's operating these days, we're heading into the typical holiday season. Recently celebrated many of the Jewish holidays, and heading into Thanksgiving coming up, and even Halloween and certainly the Christmas and New Year's. And, all of that stuff historically has been contentious. We all have our family traditions. We all have, we really want to be with our families and our children for these special holidays, but when you're divorcing, it doesn't always work. Maybe your tradition can't be upheld anymore. Maybe kids won't be with you for that holiday. And so, as we previously noted, Jordan, the world in which we operate now, particularly with all this Zoom stuff, is a lot more contentious. And we've seen this the last couple of holiday seasons, and as we're approaching a third holiday season where things aren't back to normal in all cases, I think that has evidenced over the last couple of years, and I'm worried again this year, this heightened level of contention that, to the extent we can avoid, to the extent we can head off at the past, we should. But I'm worried that here we go again. This is going to be another one of those seasons where 'tis the season to fight it out.
Yeah. So there's a lot in there, and I think we just talked a lot about the level of contest in our last podcast. And for example, I think there's an emotional component to divorce, obviously, and what you're doing with your children is intensely emotional. And to not be able to have the holiday time with your kids is very emotional. It's hard to conceive. That's a real issue in a splitting family. Some years you're not going to have Thanksgiving. Some years you will have Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It's become about winning and losing, not so much about what's practical for these children, but it's more what holidays have become is winning and losing for parents. So what I'm finding myself in situations now, for example, Halloween. We have a case where they want to split Halloween with 2 hours of trick-or-treating by mom's house and 2 hours of trick-or-treating by dad's house. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what kid trick-or-treats for 4 consecutive hours, number one? Number two is, how dysregulating is it to go with a group of friends in one area, be uprooted, and then go to another? It's just, to me, I think we can all speak practically and say maybe that one makes sense to just alternate every year. But every family's different. You do your own thing. But I think it's a lot of those type of situations where practicality is often overlooked in terms of one parent winning or hanging on to that connection rather than whether or not it makes most sense for your family.
There's so much there. And the Halloween thing is funny to me because I was never the Halloween guy. I was born right before Halloween, but it's just never my thing. The costumes, the thing. I'd put my baseball uniform on, my hockey uniform, whatever was in season, and I'd run around as that guy. I wouldn't have minded a double trick-or-treat, right? I got a sack of candy at mom's. I go to dad's neighborhood.
Right.
But what's, I think, most important in what you just said is how dysregulating that is for children.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what gets lost in all of this stuff. When parents fight about this stuff, if we're being honest, it's about us. It's about our traditions and our feelings. I couldn't fathom celebrating Thanksgiving, Christmas any of these holidays without my children.
Of course.
And, you know, I'm at a stage in my life different from where you are with your kids, where I'm going to start dealing with that next level where all of a sudden significant others come into play and they're splitting their holidays and stuff.
Right.
And you're dealing with some of that too in terms of your different family dynamics.
Absolutely.
So you're already, as a person in divorce or already out of divorce, you're already dealing with loss. I mean, there's no, when you peel down divorce, it's loss. Emotionally, physically, financially, and you layer that with loss of the time with your children. And even worse yet, it's around holidays where the time with your family, I think of Christmas for me, all of the chaos and the stress and this, get the tree set up and get the presents, wrap them and all this stuff. All that stress goes away. That Christmas Eve, that Christmas Day, when you kind of sit back and let it unfold and you see the joy in your children. To those moments in parenting is really what you have, right? And to not have those because you're getting divorced, it's painful for people. And so I do think there is some weaponization of it too, though, like you say, where it's the competitive side of this. I want you to feel miserable. I want the kids because I know that's your tradition, and I want you to feel miserable.
Right. And
that's just the wrong way to look at it, because all you're really doing is hurting the children, ping-ponging this, that, and another. And by the way, I get it. Christmas Eve every year is on December 24th. Christmas Day, 25th. You know what? With my family, after I got married and celebrating with my wife's family and my family, and as being adopted in the family that, my biological family, and celebrating all these with all these great families, sometimes we celebrate Christmas on December 22nd.
Right.
It's a Saturday we get together. It doesn't matter.
Right.
So there's always ways around it, but people get so entrenched in the principle of what they're fighting for, they really lose sight of the impact it has on the kids. And so I think as we approach the holiday season, one of the messages I think we're trying to send to people is, to the extent you can, it's easier for us to say you're living it, but step back if you can. And just imagine for the moment, what's my child or children what's going to make it easiest for them and most enjoyable? And I think that gets lost in all of the contention.
Yeah, and I think that conflict has just increased tremendously. I mean, it was one of those things where holidays, it was sort of always, that's just the way of the world, is there's always an alternating holidays. There's a pretty much standard holiday schedule that nobody really thought about. And it was just kind of like, it was what it was, and it alternated. And now, and like what we just talked about, recently in our last podcast, is everything's this battle. Yeah. And it's like, what are we doing for Halloween? What are we doing for Christmas? What are we doing? It's like there's so much attention to these holidays. When I agree, and I think what you do a good job of, James, is bringing our clients back up to the 30,000-foot look and saying, listen, you are going to spend X number of dollars fighting about a few hours during this one day, when I think the practical reality is, if you don't have Thanksgiving that year, maybe you do a new tradition on the year after with your family, and make it a new tradition, make it a new thing where you're involved with your kids. You still have those memories where you don't, again, Christmas is always December 24th, right? Christmas Eve. So just like you said, maybe you do something on the 25th. Maybe you get all your family. I mean, that's the way to do it. And I think that we, especially you, do a very nice job for our clients and servicing our clients and saying, you can spend more money for 10 Christmases fighting about this issue than just creating your own new tradition and doing your own thing on that holiday.
It's interesting because when we did our sort of relaunch, we talked about Zoom and the impact of it and the lack of any personal, really, accountability or connectivity. And it's exacerbated with this holiday issue, because the same thing, you can't just show up in court one morning and say, Judge, can you take us back in chambers? And the judge comes out and says, here's what we're going to do. And you resolve the problem. or even being able to pick up the phone and having a relationship with somebody to say, hey, let's figure out Thanksgiving. The kids are off school Wednesday, or the kids have the whole week off, or whatever. Let's divide it up. There's no problem solving to this, and it's. I think lawyers, judges, litigants, when there isn't that personal connectivity, you sometimes forget about the one person or people that this is really all about, which is the children.
Right.
You think about a little kid whose parents are fighting over these holidays and the times and splitting up. And so, by the way, if you think for a minute, in these cases like Jordan's talking about Halloween, he's got his kid dressed up like Superman. Mom comes and says, no way, we're not doing Superman. You're not Superman. We're dressing you up like
a pumpkin.
A pumpkin, right?
Yeah.
And the kid's changing his costume, whatever. Right. Like you said, depending on the age of the kids, you take the little ones out, it's usually cold, rainy.
It's a 12-minute experience.
Oh, right. It's just they got their candy. They just want to eat it, dump it out on the table. And now, no, you have to go to mom's house. You have to go to dad's house.
Right.
And sometimes it's just tiring for kids. It's amazing the anecdotal stories we get that parents report to us about the impact these things have on children. Mm-hmm. And I think people are well intended. They love their children. They always say, I want what's best for my kids. But they want it through the lens of their own eyes, and it's really hard for them to disconnect from the adult conflict. Mom, Dad, we don't get along. We're at odds. I'm doing what's best for the kids. I'm the one who's right. And it's really about this conflict. And that's where I think, to the extent we can, and you mentioned how we counsel our clients, it's not always a pleasant conversation, because a lot of times our clients want us to fight for them. And that's what we do. We're lawyers. We litigate. We're some of the best trial lawyers. And so, but there's a time and a place. And what is it that you're going to gain? You're going to get 2 hours at Halloween, and that's somehow going to be better for your child or children.
Right.
And so we have those hard conversations. With Zoom, I feel like nobody does that. There's a lot of lawyers that they're not going to bring this reality, this sort of behind the scenes look about what this is all about to their clients. They're just going to pop on a Zoom and say, Judge, we don't have an agreement. We want to fight over Halloween. And the judge is saying, okay, I got 100 cases up today.
Right.
Sure. Let's have a big hearing over who gets Halloween.
I want to ask you a question about that. So one of the issues that we're often confronted with is sort of the reverse, where we always counsel our clients to say, listen, one of the most important factors in determining parenting time or custody is your ability to communicate with the other parent and facilitate a relationship with the other parent, and be reasonable and look out for the best interests of your children.
Correct.
And is back and forth really necessary, so forth and so on. So, for example, Christmas. And we are often confronted with a situation where one of our clients says, listen, I'll just use the husband, for example. Husband has had the kids for 4 days in a row. We don't have a holiday schedule set. We have this tradition where, we have Christmas at my dad's every single year. We do this every year. It's now December 23rd. What are my options, and what is the court going to do in a situation like that?
Great question. And it really, I'm glad you brought that up, because in Cook County, for example, there's been a change in the local rules. And I can tell you, going back 30 years, emergency motions regarding holiday parenting time were not well received by the courts. And quite frankly, many times if you tried that on an emergency basis, you would receive the ire of the court, maybe bordering on sanctions, but you get a tongue lashing, because judges, like we've said, counsel, as far as I know, Christmas is on December 25th every year, is it not?
Right.
Yep. Thanksgiving is, I don't even know, what is it, the third Thursday in every year, third or fourth, third Thursday of, November every year. Yep. Why is this an emergency?
Right.
And you'd fumble and say, well, we were trying to work out an agreement and we couldn't, and so, here we are 3 days before Christmas, and, we need your help, Judge.
Yep.
Now, oftentimes the judges would, after probably chiding you, maybe, even your clients, they might weigh in and say, here's what I'm going to do. And it was exactly what you said. It's down the middle. I don't care what your tradition is.
Right.
I don't care about anything. We're going black and white. You get Christmas Eve. You get Christmas Day. Transition time is Christmas morning, 9 a.m., and you're flip-flopping next year. Done. Next case.
Yep.
And you don't have any ability to really try to capture those traditions. So now, fast forward, here we are, heading into the holidays of 2022. In Cook County, the judges have said enough of these emergency motions. What's an emergency motion? It's, Judge, I'm filing something today. I want you to deal with it tomorrow. I don't want to have to wait in line. Mm-hmm. I know you have 20, 30, 50 cases, 75 cases already lined up for the day. Put me to the head of the class because my matter is so important. It's such an emergency, you have to deal with it.
Right.
And you know what happened during COVID? It just became almost like standard issue.
Right. That's file an emergency.
Okay. Right, because they tried with Zoom to have these rules in place. You file something, this happens. You have to file something in 7 days, in 21 days. All these, and you couldn't get anything done.
Right.
And so people just were emergency motions left and right, to where, at least like I said in Cook County, said enough. To the point now, you really risk being sanctioned, even the lawyers. Mm-hmm. If you bring these sort of BS emergency motions, they're not emergencies. Right? So here we are, a month before Thanksgiving, mm-hmm. and give or take, and then we're heading into, the Christmas and New Year's and all of those wonderful holidays. Yep. And you better get your stuff together, because if you think you're going to walk in a day or two or even the week of a holiday and a judge say, sure, let me set a time special for you. We're going to make sure that we hear all your concerns, all your traditions. Not going to happen. And you're going to walk out of there with a very vanilla ruling.
If any ruling at all.
If any ruling at all.
Right.
Yeah. How many times we had counsel work it out?
Right. Or not an emergency. Goodbye.
Yep.
And
done.
So what advice would you give somebody, James, who doesn't have a holiday schedule that, obviously these holidays are upcoming with children. What advice would you give somebody who's in this predicament?
You know what? First thing I would say is sit down with, or if that's not feasible, have a conversation with your spouse and be the bigger person in the room. If you know your spouse, like Jordan said, has this family tradition, it's important to them. Guess what? If it's important to them, it's probably important to your kids. Let them have it. Then from there, get an order. Get an order in place that it is what it is. At least now you can plan around it.
Right.
Be reasonable. I've had situations where literally, the issue of Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, when do you exchange the kids? And then they say, well, I want Christmas Eve, and I'll bring the kids back Christmas Day at noon. What's the point of having, the whole point of Christmas morning is to have the kids wake up, run around, get the presents, or at least, even if they woke up at the other parent's place and got over there at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, they're still in their PJs, and all of a sudden they start opening presents. That's the magic of it.
Right.
So think about the kids. But if you can't have a conversation with your spouse, if your lawyer can't have a reasonable communication with your spouse's lawyer, try to get into mediation. We work with some wonderful mediators.
Yep.
We've got some wonderful retired judges that do mediation.
Yep.
We've got former practicing attorneys. I'll give a shout out to Alex Jacobson or Kimberly Cook. Wonderfully talented mediators that can sit down with you and your spouse, even with your lawyers in there if you need to, and say, let's problem solve. That was a theme we talked about in our sort of relaunch, is problem solving, in the inability to problem solve. Mediation is a much better platform because in mediation, you can explain to the mediator the importance of this tradition. Explain to the mediator what the tradition involves and why you need a return time at a certain time. You might have to travel to a different state or city for this. And then the mediator can try to work with your spouse and maybe do some, hey, let's compromise here and you compromise there.
Yep.
Problem solved. You get to court, like Jordan said, it might be, get the hell out of here, I'm not dealing with this. Or, okay, I'm going to deal with this. This is what happens, too bad, deal with it, don't care.
Yep.
Move on.
Yep. And I think James's point is really well taken. I think being proactive and jumping on this now, so you're not scrambling at the last minute and, result to going to court and basically losing and the judge saying, it is what it is, or here, I'm doing this with you have no say in it whatsoever. Be proactive, number one. And number two is be reasonable and be practical. And I think that if you're not able to communicate directly, I think the mediation is a great point, which I think we should talk about in a separate podcast in terms of preparing for mediation, the process, and the different styles.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think it's interesting because Jordan and I have actually contemplated, and perhaps in the new year we might launch this, offering a particular type of mediation services. So there are different ways, like you mentioned, to mediate and get to a resolution. We come from a particular bent in that we know what's going to happen in court. And so, maybe we're able to give perspective and actually direct people in a mediation, where in some classic mediation, it's more let the people direct themselves, and hopefully themselves reach some kind of an agreement. But I think what's important about what we're talking about is the broader conversation isn't just about holidays. This is a divorce in general. Everything we're talking about is applicable in your divorce.
Every issue.
Every issue, right? People think, oh my God, he or she took money out of the account. Run into court and make the judge put them back. That may not be viewed as an emergency. So try to have these conversations in a way that you have some control over it. You don't want to rely on a judge just making a decision because, candidly, they're overwhelmed and they may not have the time to really devote to your issue in the way that you would like. We've had some great experiences with a couple of terrific judges recently, probably not off limits to say Judge Powers, Judge Bowes. I mean, really gave us the time, did an excellent job, allowed people to put on their case, they heard the evidence. I mean, really refreshing. But that's not always the case, especially on some of these ancillary matters. And you want to get through the process. You want to get done. You want to get an order in place, even if it's not perfect. At least you know what the rules are. And more importantly, your kids have some stability. They have something that they know. They may not like every aspect of it, but at least this is the time you're with mom, this is you're with dad. And people can adjust to that and you settle into a new norm. So we're talking about holidays because it's right around the corners. But the reality of it is everything we talked about really is applicable generally in a divorce.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the overall point of that should be taken as well. It's like the whole point, everyone says, oh, avoid court. Well, the reason they say that is not only does it cost money to go to court, but number two is you lose control, where you have a third party, you have a judge making decisions for your life and for your children.
Yep.
So if you can rise up, like we were talking about before, put your kids' interests first, if possible. Work it out with your spouse, if possible. And there's cases that we have where it's not possible, and that's a different situation. But generally, with these issues, as it relates to your children, as it relates to your case, try your best to maintain some of that control. And don't let a third party who doesn't know your family versus, my family or your family, and it's just another name on their call sheet, make that decision if you can avoid it.
Yeah. And I think as I'm sort of reflecting on this too, that one thing I would say is if you're in the middle of a divorce, again, easy for us to say, hard to process emotionally. This Thanksgiving isn't the end of the world. And if this Thanksgiving doesn't go your way, but you need to make a concession, fine. You want to take the kids for an entire weekend from Wednesday to Sunday for this Thanksgiving. Boy, I really hate that I'm not going to hang with the kids, or them see my family for Thanksgiving. But you know what? I'm gonna be the bigger person. I'm gonna be gracious for the benefit of my children, understanding that I think I've taken a chip that I have now that says, you know, I want to make sure, number one, next year I get Thanksgiving, and by the way, I get the whole weekend. Or, okay, you know, I've conceded something that's really important to you. Here's what's important to me. So again, even mediation, and we that's one thing I'll say about the pandemic and all this Zoom stuff, is the system got so backed up and clogged up and really became even, I'd say, less efficient than it had been. People started realizing we got to figure this stuff out. We got to figure a different way. If a judge isn't going to be able to hear this, sometimes we get hearing dates to be out months. Mm-hmm. So that's where mediation all of a sudden became a better alternative, and we've done a lot of mediation. It's just, as they call it, alternative dispute resolution. And that's, you know, people in a divorce are in a dispute. They disagree on who should get what, who should spend what time with the kids. And so how do we resolve that? There's different ways to do that. And I agree with you, Jordan. These judges, they work really hard, they care, but they can only do so much. There's hundreds and thousands of cases that are before them that get filed every year. They just can't make your life, your case, that personal to them where they can just dive in. They can't devote the kind of time that you'd maybe want them to. So take the high road, try to get things done out of court. And if we're going to go to court for something, our thing is we need to be prepared. We need to have the time to really load up and put the best case on. We're not going to go into any kind of hearing unprepared. That's not how we do things.
Yeah.
So think of now, what are we doing for Christmas, even though it's 2-3 months away? Because if we need to get into court, we better file something now.
Right.
And I like the idea oftentimes of filing something, and then while that's pending, while we're waiting for the hearing, okay, let's talk. Let's go to mediation. But at least now, if you don't want to agree, I'm not going to be stuck trying to file an emergency motion. That's not going to work.
Right.
I've got a hearing date. Fine. I'll do it either way. The easier way is for you guys to agree to something, but if not, you know, then we'll do it the hard way and we'll go to court.
Yeah.
So, again, a lot of the stuff that we're kind of throwing at you as, you know, the end of 2022 comes is just to try to give you some perspective as to how you can manage this very, very difficult time in your lives, particularly when things aren't really what they used to be. And so everybody's navigating this new world, these new experiences. I don't know that things will ever go back to the way they were, but certain things like dividing up time on a holiday, that hasn't changed. So put some thought into what's important to you. Put even more thought into what's important and better for your children. And even if it hurts to acknowledge, hey, this is better for the kids, you've got to focus on that, and that really has to be what's always at the forefront of your mind when you're dealing with holidays, children, and the impact it has on them. So we're glad to be back. Like I said, hopefully in 2023, hard to believe, we're going to be back on a more regular basis, and we always welcome you, the viewers and listeners, to reach back out to us. Are there issues you're dealing with, thinking about a marriage, or a divorce rather, thinking about actually filing, being in the middle of a divorce, you know, just having come out of it and still having frustrations and enforcement issues, and my spouse isn't following the rules, those kind of things? Feel free to always reach out to us to consult with us, but also to give us ideas as to topics we can bring to you. How can we give you the behind-the-scene look on issues that are really impacting you in the situation that you're at? We want to speak to those very issues. And so, as always, we appreciate you joining us. Again, you can reach either one of us and review anything about the firm, about our practice area, at our website, www.beermannlaw.com. And, of course, I'm your host, James Quigley. My direct extension, 312-621-1225. Don't ever hesitate to call. Jordo?
Yep, Jordan Rosenberg, 312-262-2567.
Appreciate you following along, and look for more to come.